Well, good day, everyone. Hope you're having a remarkable day. I know I am here in Indianapolis as we hit the noon hour for me. If you're here with me live, I'm so glad that you're here. What I'd love for you to do first is to uh, open up the comments in whatever social platform you're in and say hello and tell us where you're watching and listening from. We'd love for you to do that. And we can see what kind of a learning community we have gathering together today for this great conversation. So if you don't know, if this is your first time with me, this will eventually become an episode in the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, but we won't start that part for a minute here. So I just want you to imagine, since you're here with me live, that you're joining my guest and I, whom I'll introduce in a second, for a cup of coffee. If you've got questions and comments and ideas, I want you to share them. I hope that you will. It will make for a better conversation, and eventually it'll make a better podcast as well. So again, just say hello, tell us where you're from, participate, engage, because if you do that, it will be so much better. And so now I'm going to do a countdown, and this is when the podcast will actually begin once it releases in a few weeks. So Marissa, we're going to start in 3, 2, 1. Principles. We could talk about leadership fads and hot topics, but on today's episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, we're talking about proven principles and how to apply them so that we can lead at higher levels than ever. Welcome to another live episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. And if you're listening, you're saying, wait a minute, live? I'm not with you live. Well, you could be in the future. And the best way to do that, to find out when we're doing that and to get connected with us for that, would be to join our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. You can just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to get connected so that you can be on a future live episode and hear them much sooner. Okay. Today's episode is brought to you by Remarkable Development Sessions. A Remarkable Development Session is a webinar for a new world. We know that we learn in interaction with others, but in a fractured, increasingly virtual world, the workshop experience has been shifted to a focus on delivering the content, leaving the application to you as an individual. Even if you love learning from webinars, you've likely thought there's got to be a better way. And we want to help make webinars far better than they've been in the past. You can learn more about how we're doing that and get connected for an upcoming session on a valuable skill by going to kevinikenberry.com/remarkable development. And now I'm going to bring in our guest. And if you're watching, you can now see him, and let me introduce him to you now. His name is Jim Reid. He's an accomplished executive and trusted advisor to 6 CEOs. He has navigated significant change and immense pressure to build winning teams that outperform competitors. He has coached, advised, and developed thousands of aspiring leaders who have gone on to deliver extraordinary results and make the world an even better place. Originally trained as a military pilot, he was recognized in 2021 as one of the 50 best executives in Canada by ROB Magazine. Today, we're going to talk about his approach and the lessons which he's outlined in his book, Leading to Greatness: 5 Principles to Transform Your Leadership and Build Great Teams. Jim splits his time between Toronto and Muskoka, Canada, with his wife, Patty, their children, and a growing group of grandchildren. And Jim, I am so glad to have you. Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.
Oh, Kevin, it's great to be here, and thanks for having me.
So let's see. We've got Canadians. We've got Ontario, and we've got BC.
Okay. Hello, Canada.
And we've got Palestine, which is clearly not in Canada. And we've got San Francisco, more Canadians. Beautiful. We've got Michiganders, etc. So listen, I'm so glad you're here, Jim. And I'm going to ask a question that I often ask people. And that's just to tell us a little bit about your journey. When you were 10, you probably weren't thinking you'd end up doing the work that you've done. So sort of just very quickly, what got you here?
Well, I think, we're all just, we're the sum of our experiences in life. And for me, I've had some fantastic experiences. I grew up just outside of Toronto in a steel town called Hamilton. As like most Canadian kids, I was really passionate about hockey and played competitive hockey for years and ended up not obviously making my dream, which was to play in the NHL, but I did other great things. I I decided to go into the military, as you mentioned, and I attended Royal Roads Military College, which was one of the 3 military colleges in Canada, similar to United States Air Force Academy or Indianapolis or West Point, and decided to become a pilot. And being a pilot was probably one of the most challenging, rewarding things I ever did. It taught me discipline. Military service made me a better person. There's no question about it. Learned about service to my country and to others. And then I moved into operations, ran a business, and later, after I finished that, when I was the CEO I was working for, moved me into run HR. So I became the chief HR officer for 3 different organizations, and it was while I was in that role that I had just such a lucky, fortunate break. I met Jim Collins, and he and I connected, and he invited me to work on 3 of his big research projects. Good to Great was the first one, then How the Mighty Fall was second, and the last one I did with him was Great by Choice. And there's many good management thinkers out there, but Jim's definitely in the league of his own. He's a fantastic, curious, disciplined researcher. I've learned a tremendous amount from him.
So you've now followed in his footsteps, if you will, with this new book, Leading to Greatness. And the subtitle is what I love: 5 Principles to Transform Your Leadership and Build Great Teams. So we're not going to have time to talk about all 5 principles. I've got a couple, Jim, that I picked out. I haven't told you which ones, but give us very quickly what the 5 are, just at a very high level, so people have a context of where we're headed.
Yeah. And, I've always believed that it's never too late in life to learn and grow. So the book really provides you with a step-by-step guide to build a customized development plan if you want to take your leadership to the next level. That's really what it's all about. And the 5 principles are, the foundation for leadership being clarity of values and purpose. That's what you build your leadership success on, and having clarity and around that allows you to be authentic and genuine as a leader. Principle 2 is around, it's an inside out process around playing to your strengths and passion every day. And that's your best path for success. 3, of course, is around making one of your signature qualities as a leader, making the right people decisions consistently. And it's about the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus. And some are better. Most leaders are better at one of those aspects than the other. 4 is be engaged and drive engagement in your team, and the team being the performance unit in the company, and critical to building and shaping culture. And 5 is discipline. It's about being self-disciplined as a leader, and it's about a culture of discipline as an organization. And discipline is really the afterburner of driving performance. It's sort of, you can see how the 5 principles work together. The foundation of values and purpose, clarity, inside out, strengths and passion allows you to then pick the right people on the team, then drive engagement, then be disciplined around driving results. So that's basically the concept in a nutshell.
That is the concept in a nutshell. Yeah. And so we're going to talk about a couple of those things.
Sure.
In this current environment, and I say current, you and I are having this conversation in October of 2022. It'll go on the podcast basically the 1st of December of 2022. And we're still living in a time when people are losing folks. I mean, maybe we're still in this great resignation, whatever you want to call it, or not, but there's still very low unemployment. We got a lot of people trying, how do I get the right people? How do I find the right people? And that's really where I want to start. The 3rd principle is about people. So I really want to talk about your thoughts on finding the right people, given that basis, given that foundation that you've already talked about. How do we find the right people?
Yeah. And making the right people decisions. I mean, I think some of the maybe the most important choices, Kevin, we make in our life are the choices we make around people, our spouses, our partners, our friends, including those who we decide to work with on our teams and in our organizations. And the right people from a leadership perspective comes down to fit. It's really about fit. And the right people on the bus, so to speak, or on your team are people who share your values, who are inspired by your purpose and what you're trying to do. They're team players. They're open to change. They have a passion for your business and for your customers, and they want to learn and grow. And, the flip side of that coin is the wrong people on the bus. And, I often refer to them as the engagement killers on the team. And, we've all had people on a team, or leaders have people on
Addition
a
by
team.
subtraction, right?
Yeah, right. And they see themselves as victims. They diminish the spirit of the team. They resist change, and they're not good for the overall team performance or for trust in the team. And so, getting the right people, the formula is really right people on the bus into the right seats, and then learning as a leader how to build a strong, high performing team. That's really the simple playbook.
Simple, not necessarily easy.
Yeah,
Jim,
yeah,
as I'm listening to you,
right.
as I'm listening to you describe those things, everyone who's listening, whether they're in Palestine or BC or India or San Francisco, are all saying, yeah, that's who I want on my team. That's who I want on my bus. And yet there's some things that we particularly may want in our organization. Like all of those are right on target. And yet, how do we determine the more specific things that we might be looking for when you talk about fit in terms of our team or our organization?
Yeah. Well, when I'm coaching leaders, or even for myself, Kevin, when I was building out my team, when I'm interviewing leaders, to try to make a decision, is this person a good fit for me or for the organization, et cetera, I come at it very simply. I only ask 3 questions in the interview. The first question is, what are the shaping events in your life? Not just in your work life, in your whole life. Tell me what it is, that shaping experiences that have made you who you are as a leader today. And in asking that question, I'm probing values, I'm probing behaviors, I'm probing character, and I'm seeing whether or not the candidate or the individual that we're having a conversation with is willing to open up about, what are the things that really shaped them and really made them who they are today as a leader, and who are the people who've influenced them, and what have they learned from these experiences in their life. So that's question 1. Question 2 for me.
Before you go on, let me just say this to everybody, and that is that not only is it getting at those things, but it's far more powerful than saying, so what are your values? Because
exactly.
That isn't going to really tell me much, probably, right?
So
question number 2.
Question number 2 is, I think one of the best coaching tools that I got out of the Good to Great research was the 3 circle framework. And it was used in the Good to Great research as a strategy tool around the Good to Great companies to outperform their competitors by, I don't know, Kevin, it was like 10-1 for decades, right? So it wasn't luck. And this strategy tool not only works at building a winning strategy for a company, but it also works at building a winning strategy for a life. And so circle 1 is, what are your genetically encoded strengths? Not what you're good at. It's a higher test. It's what are your deep strengths? What are you differentiated around? What are the 3 to 5 things that on the assembly line of life, if you like to say, you can excel at? And, people, I'm looking for self-awareness and insight around, and how clear they are around what these deep strengths are that differentiate them, the 3 to 5. And then the second question for me is, on the 3 circles framework, is what are you passionate about? I'm looking for insight around when work doesn't feel like work for the individual, because what is it when you get up in the morning that motivates you? Or do you like to do creative work? Do you like to solve problems? Do you like to build teams? Do you like to run a team? Do you like to, what is it that you're excited about attacking when you get up in the morning? And this is passion beyond family and friends and hobbies, right? It's about the kind of work that where you answer the question, I never have to work in a day in my life if I love what I do.
Right.
So I'm really going after getting insight and clarity and focus from the individual around, deep strengths and passion. And then circle 3 is really it's more for when you're starting out. It's how do you make a living? So, I'm looking for a pattern of success, recognizing that success in life is often cumulative. And I'm looking for the kind of momentum that individuals have been able to build. So that's those 3. And then the third question I ask is just, what questions do you have? I want to see how engaged they are, how much research that they've done on the organization, and and if they really want the job.
I love that last question, because in my experience as well, sitting in that seat of doing the asking, I often find that question gives me as much information as anything else about their level of interest, about their willingness to be prepared, about the nature of their ability to ask questions, even in what might be considered a high stress, highly important conversation, right? Which we're going to have people in the workplace, right? So I love those questions.
It's like a dance, interviewing is like it's like a dance, it's like dating, you have to make a good impression. And for people where their values are shared, where their strengths and their passion fit with the seat that they're recruiting for, I'm always saying to people, ask for the job. Tell them you want the job. Tell them that there's nobody that you want to be on their team, that nobody's going to work harder and be more committed than you. And most people don't. They leave it unsaid, right, Kevin? And that's kind of what I see.
100%. Listen, I was with a group last week. I held a $20 bill up. I said, is there someone who would like to influence me, persuade me to give them the $20? And they talk around it, and I don't give them the 20. I'm like, the rest of the group, like, what did he not do? Well, he didn't ask.
Yeah,
if he'd asked, he'd gotten the $20. Like, we're talking about something worth a lot more than $20, right? We're talking about a career. We're talking about a future. We're talking about a chance to make a difference. So
exactly.
I love all of that.
Exactly.
I love all that. I didn't want to have a expert in HR on without asking that question, because it's the kind of thing that people always want to talk about. And you talk about it a great deal in the book, and it's great. You talk also about the 3 disciplines of finding the right people, the 3 disciplines around our people management. Can you share those real quick? Because I think one or more of these are also things some of us mess up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that, there's a whole bunch of things around discipline, right? That becomes critical in terms of being the best leader that you can possibly be. One of the things, the principle of discipline is kind of sliced into two different dimensions. One is about self-discipline as a leader yourself, and the other is around a culture of discipline. So just on the culture of discipline, one of the things that is most important, I think, for building leaders is teaching leaders how to build high-performing teams. This is a skill you can learn. And I believe, like the 5 principles is a model for leadership. And I believe that if you want to be better at anything, you need to develop against a model. The model may not be perfect, but what I find is most people are winging it when they're trying to get better. So pick a model that you can relate to, that fits with your values, develop against it, and stick with it. So on a culture of discipline, the most important thing for me is building a high-performing culture. The team is the performance unit of the most important performance unit in a company. And as a leader, you need to learn how to be very skilled at building a high-performance team. And the model that I recommend for people is Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team model. It's very simple. It's highly intuitive. It's easy to relate to. And you can take a team from very low levels of engagement and performance to top quartile in 6 to 12 to 18 months if you have the right people on the bus. The second thing,
and we can keep that same team together, which is also another challenge.
You can keep the team together. And the other dimension is around disciplined behaviors. And over the last, I'd say 30 years, I did this really interesting research with an organizational psychologist, and we took assessments, like psychological assessments of top executives, about 1,000 of them, and we correlated with performance ratings and talent ratings. And not everybody has. We found these 5 core behaviors that were most evident around disciplined leadership, and the first one was humility. We versus I. Some of this stuff, Kevin, I know you relate to and you talk about in your podcast. The second one was mission focused, relentless about the mission. The third one was grit. The fourth one was being a builder, not a divider. And the fifth one was they're storytellers, right? They're constantly able to reinforce the context for the journey. And doing it in a very relatable way, they build trust and followership so people will come on the journey with them. So these are all, not all leaders have all five, but the very best leaders, I would say, would be working on all five, or they've got the majority of them. And that's why they're able to build, such incredible followership.
Yeah, and just on the last one, the storyteller one, it's so interesting because I've been doing some work, Jim, with a team, and we're talking about how to be a better communicator as a leader. And I said, well, here's where to start. Where to start is focus on the message and the audience, not on yourself, and then use story to make that happen, because that's the key. Because our life is all about story, and so the more we can connect people to that and help them find those connections in the stories that we're using to make things real, it's incredibly valuable.
Yeah, there was an amazing moment in the Good to Great research, Kevin, and I'm not sure, you may have come across it, but it was Jim Collins in one of the research calls was sharing with the research team this discussion he had with Admiral James Stockdale, who was the highest ranking, most decorated officer as a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War. I think Jim asked him in the conversation, he just made the assumption that the positive people who made it out. And Jim said, that's not true. The positive people kind of died of a broken heart. And the people who made it out embraced this paradox, which Jim Collins referred to as the Stockdale paradox, which kind of had two dimensions to it. One was you have to, you have to confront the brutal facts of your current reality. Like, I'm a prisoner of war. I'm probably not going to get out by Christmas or Easter. I'm going to be here for a while. But on the other hand, you have to never lose hope that you'll get out. And that Stockdale paradox, confront the brutal facts and never lose hope, is a wonderful paradox or framework for communicating in a real, relatable way with people to build followership and trust.
So I was planning to ask you this. This is the perfect time to ask it, because you mentioned it briefly in the book, and it's certainly one of the things that everyone's talking about today is psychological safety. So what are your thoughts about psychological safety? Maybe you want to tie it to the Stockdale paradox, but I'm curious what your thoughts are about this sort of very relevant and timely topic.
Yeah, and I think, a few years ago, and Google came up with this big study, around the role that trust and psychological safety plays in high-performing team performance. And I believe in this very much so. Trust is about, if you think about our relationships in life, the people that we trust are the people that around us that have positive intention around us in life. And the psychological safety is in some ways similar but different than trust. It's about the environment that gets created for the people that are on the team. And people, in order to go the distance in the journey and to perform, not just in the good times, but the tough times, they need to know that they can be real and vulnerable with the team and not have it held against them in terms of the contribution that they can make today or in the future. And they need to know that they'll be respected, for being honest and forthright, and for challenging the kinds of things that teams need to challenge. That's why I like the Stockdale paradox, because, a great leader will set an environment in a team which allows people on the team to raise issues. And if an individual on the team fails to deliver and they learn from it, then they shouldn't be ostracized from the team either. So it's an environment that gets created that allows people to take risks, to be themselves and to be at their best when they need to be at their best in terms of performing for the team.
I think too, and so, feel free to agree or disagree here, that again, when you talk about psychological safety not being exactly the same thing as trust, certainly connected 100%, right? Yeah. But oftentimes people think about, well, as a leader, creating psychological safety with the team, but someone, let's say, Jim, that you work for me, like, you could trust me as your leader, but still not feel psychologically safe in the group, right? Like, how am I being judged by the rest of the team? How is that impacting? And so even though I might be feel very comfortable and safe in an individual conversation with my leader, not necessarily with the entire team. You want to comment on that one way or the other? That's one of the things that makes it different than just straight up trust.
Yeah. I think it's absolutely 100%. I think you nailed that. And, trust is often an issue between two individuals, right? And it exists in a team too. But it's not just the leader that makes you feel psychologically safe, it's your peers. And I think that's the point that you just made, which is a very powerful point around, creating a psychologically safe environment for people to be themselves and to be at their best and to take a risk and to not be penalized for it. And if they fail, to not be ostracized by the team because they made a mistake, as long as they're willing to learn from it.
As long as they're willing to learn from it. Right. So one more area for us to talk about before we start to wrap up, and that's engagement. So I'm going to read something from the book. I want to talk about engagement, but I'm going to read something from the book and then let you sort of take off on that if you wish, if I can find what I want real quickly. I thought I had it. There it is. Ultimately, engagement must emerge, develop, and grow organically. It can't be manufactured. The employees' collective desires and energies have to be in sync with the higher purpose in order for the employee experience to be people-focused and fulfilling. So that's a big way to think about engagement. So do you want to comment on that a bit, Jim?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it comes back to, how the principles work together, with values being the foundation and clarity of passion and strengths, having the right people on board. And I think that allows you, right, to have the right ingredients in the organization, right people, clear on strengths and passion, excited about the journey, engage themselves, leaders engaged, they're engaged, and kind of a disciplined drive for results. I think for me, engagement is the core people metric, right? It's kind of the fuel for high performance, and it can be built. I mean, years ago when I went into the last organization I was in, engagement was below the Canadian median. It was in the low 60s. And we taught leaders how to get behind the number one driver, by the way, of engagement is personal growth and development. And the second would be meaningful work. Third would be working for talented leaders. But you can create this. And you teach leaders how to get behind people's personal growth and development, and teach leaders how to build high performance teams. And you can drive engagement. In our case, we drove it from the low 60s to 90%, almost 90%, and hit record pride scores during the pandemic of 94%. This is something that can be learned and executed on. The one thing that I would say is that, the team is really the performance unit when you think about how this grows organically. And culture, Drucker's famous quote, Kevin, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, culture gets built one team at a time, one leader at a time, and it's the execution engine of the company. So that's why I believe engagement is so fundamentally important. And of course, leaders can't ask their team to be engaged if they're not engaged themselves. Well,
you can ask, but it ain't going to work. That is for sure. You got no shot, everybody. So Jim, we've covered a good bit of ground here. Yeah. And I'm curious if there was something that you hoped I would ask, or is there something else that you feel led for us to talk about briefly before we start to wrap up?
I think for the people that are, listening to the podcast or, on the call with us today, the one thing that I always remind people is that, high performance is a personal choice. There's nobody that can make a choice for you as an individual. And I just believe, put myself included in this, that I really believe that no matter how good a leader I am today, I can be better in 6 months than I am today or 12 months today, if I choose to make that choice. And that's the first thing. The second thing is, we talked a little bit about this, that success in life is cumulative. It's about building momentum. And once you build that momentum, your success accelerates. And the third thing is, lots of leaders that I'm coaching, not lots of them, some of them are looking for the big breakthrough, right? The one big thing that they could do differently that could create success. And change doesn't happen that way. It's almost always stringing together a series of smaller changes that at the end of the day, when you string them together, can make a really big difference in terms of where you end up in your life. So that's what I really encourage. Make that choice to be better, to be the best you can be. Build your momentum, and focus on stringing together a series of smaller things, Kevin. Right? That can accumulate together, can be strung together to really change your trajectory.
Thank you for that, Jim. So shifting gears before we finish, tell me, Jim, what do you do for fun?
Well, of course, I have a growing group of grandchildren. So
I mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised we went 30 minutes before you said anything about them.
Well, I'm sort of in a different phase of my life now. I've gotten out of the big corporate job, and I'm spending all my time just helping people be the best they can be. And part of what I want to do is give back to my family, because they were so supportive of me when I was building my career. And lots of times I made choices to put my work first. And now I have an opportunity to give back, and that's to both people I'm coaching, but also to my family and at the end of the day, it's family and relationships. That's why purpose is so important in your life. It's just, that's really what you have to get right, I think, to lead a happy, successful life.
The only thing you knew I was going to ask is this next question.
Yes, right.
And we've already talked about 2 or 3 books during the course of our conversation. But what are you reading now, or what have you read recently, Jim?
Yeah, so I'm very interested in culture. I really think it's so critical to building sustainable performance. So I'm reading a book right now called The Culture Code. It's by Daniel Coyle. He's been out for a while, but I've had so many different people recommend that book to me. So I've just started reading that, and I'm quite into it right now. And I just think it's as a leader, you really need to understand culture and how to build it. And the other one I'm rereading, and it comes back to what we were just talking about in life, about purpose. And years ago, I read this great article by Clayton Christensen, who was a professor at Harvard. He wrote an article called How Will You Measure Your Life? So he wrote a book I read the article, but I'm now reading the book, and it's about purpose in life. And I've been finding that most leaders are pretty clear on values, but not so clear on purpose. Yet that really should, if you have clarity, it defines your path. You may not ever get there, but at least you can take steps towards it. And so in order to be a more effective coach and to get even more clarity myself, I'm really excited about rereading Clayton Christensen's bestseller on purpose.
That is awesome. Excellent stuff. For those of you that don't know, all of that will be in the show notes. You can go wherever you're listening to get that, including how you can get a hold of this book, Leading to Greatness by Jim Reid. So, Jim, where else do you want to point people? How can people learn more about you, the book, etc.?
Well, I have a website called jimreidcoaching.com, and the book, of course, is always available, as anything is available on Amazon or your favorite bookstores. And I'm on LinkedIn, of course. If anybody has questions for me personally, just send me a message on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to get back to you and help you in any way I can.
Well, Jim, I appreciate you joining us today, and you can rest easy. While we're not quite done, I don't have any more questions for you, but I have a question for everybody else, and it's simply this. Now what? What action are you going to take as a result of this? Did you get some idea around engagement that you need to apply? Did you get a sense about what you need to do differently or think differently about as your role as a leader? Were you challenged to think about your purpose and values? Did you get some specific ideas about new interview questions that you might use to perhaps simplify the interviews that you do? There's a number of things. Those are just a few of the notes that I took during the course of our 30 minutes together. The challenge, though, is what action are you going to take? Because if all you did was enjoy our conversation, while Jim and I would be happy to hear that, we'd be happier that you went out and used this as one of those steps, one of those cumulative steps to reaching the success that you could have and to become the leader you were born to be. So Jim, thanks again so much for being here. It was such a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
And with that, everybody, that brings us to the end of another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. But it's not the end. There's plenty of episodes prior to this that you may have missed. You can always go back, and we'll be here again next week. But between now and your next episode, if you enjoyed this, I hope that you'll invite someone else to come along on this journey with you. Invite someone to listen to this episode or another one in our catalog, our archives. Hope you'll do that. And I will be back with you next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.